The Sony PlayStation, perhaps one of the greatest game consoles ever made. But where did it come from, and how did it start? Well, we're going to find out today on this episode of Starship Gaming. Originally, Nintendo teamed up with Sony and was going to create a game console that not only would play Super Famicom games, or in the case of everyone else in the world, Super Nintendo games, but would be able to play CD-ROM based games. Basically, it was like a Sega CD, except everything was built into one console. This you see before you is a prototype, which was known as the PlayStation. This prototype would have been released probably around 1991, 1992. But Nintendo decided that they were going to go with Philips, and this allowed the creation of the Philips CDI, which is kind of a predecessor to the original PlayStation that we know today. Basically, they decided that they weren't going to even bother with Philips, and Philips went off and created their Philips CDI. And what happened was, because they owned rights to certain Nintendo properties, well, they didn't own rights, but they had licensing. That's why we got some really terrible Nintendo-themed Philips games, so that explains that part of history. But Sony decided, hey, we're going to go off and just make a PlayStation. We're going to compete with Nintendo and Sega and Atari, and we're going to make our own system. And thus, the PlayStation, as we know it today, was born. Released in 1994 in Japan and everywhere else in 1995, including North America, the Sony PlayStation was a huge success. They ran campaigns such as the You Are Not Red E campaign. If you don't understand, the E is red. You are not Red E, in case you didn't know that. And if this looks odd to you, yes, these were the original PlayStation controllers. This was before the days of DualShock and analog sticks, just so you youngsters out there say, that's not a PlayStation controller. Well, it absolutely was, and that's the one that I grew up using before I decided to buy a DualShock controller in 2000. I waited that long to get one, and it was amazing. But still, you gotta appreciate the classics. And something else that's kind of, you kids won't understand today, memory cards. Memory cards were actually used, they were not changed any from their design, for PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2. They basically remained the same, and this revolutionized how we saved games, even though other consoles had memory cards or some form of saving memory. Instead of, say, for example, cartridges had save batteries to keep them from losing your game. It kept you from losing your game. The memory card basically replaced that for CD-ROM based video game consoles. Eventually, the PlayStation 1 received a redesign around 2000, shortly before the PlayStation 2 was released. I believe it was the summer of 2000, if memory serves me correctly. I actually have one of these also, in addition to a regular one that I received when I was a kid. I actually have one that has a screen that clips onto the back, so it's kind of portable. Not really, but still, it's cool. And if you find one on eBay, I recommend picking one up, just because. But yeah, this was the redesign that came out around the summer of 2000, and they made these up until, well, according to the internet, they made them till 2005, but I stopped seeing these appear sometime around early 2004 in stores. I think my local Kmart, which is no longer open, actually sold these up until probably the summer of 2004 before they disappeared. I don't know if that was just stock they had left over or what, but there you have it. So, the PlayStation 1 you have to admit, was highly successful, and it paved the way for other game consoles to come, including, well, I guess you could say it helped inspire Sega, because in 1999 we got the Dreamcast, which looked kind of like a PlayStation. Of course, you know, Sega Saturn itself was CD based, so that's up for debate. But Sony also had influence on the computer market, because you could say that it wrangled Microsoft into the console market, which we got the Microsoft Xbox. But we'll save that for another story. But it was highly influential. It had a lot of great games. Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, the classics, Twisted Metal, Tomb Raider, even though the first Tomb Raider was also released for Sega Saturn, but, you know, we'll consider it a PlayStation title for, you know, for the most part. But yeah, there you have it. One of the most successful game consoles of its time. Well, until PlayStation 2, of course, but PlayStation 2 will save for another day and for a future episode of Starship Gaming. Until next time, I'll see you.